The hospital smelled like new life, but everything inside me felt like something had just died. That kind of sterile sweetness clung to my nostrils, the scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint powdery whiff of baby lotion. Outside the maternity suite, nurses moved with calm efficiency, offering cheerful nods and careful hands. But inside me, there was nothing calm. I stood just inside the doorway, watching my wife Ariel cradle a baby girl wrapped in a soft pink blanket that looked too pristine for the weight it carried. Her smile was luminous, unburdened, too bright for a day that cracked something permanent in me. Across the room, our mothers hovered like moths to flame. Marta, Ariel's mother, was fussing with the baby's cap, cooing in that high-pitched voice she used whenever she played the doting matriarch. My mother, Helen, was snapping photos with a proud grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were gushing, almost reverent, like the child was royalty, like we were some storybook family whose next chapter was written in joy. But I was still on the previous page, still staring at the line that hadn't been crossed. Then the nurse approached, blonde, mid-30s, a kind smile that made me wince. She held out a clipboard. "Mr. Grayson, we need you to sign the birth certificate," she said, like it was nothing more than protocol, like it wasn't a chisel pressing into granite. I looked at the form. Blank lines, a space for my name, a line waiting to be filled in by a man who should have felt nothing but pride. My hand hovered over the pen she offered. Then I looked at Ariel, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide with some cocktail of anticipation and assumed trust. And I shook my head. Her smile shattered like glass dropped from a height. I didn't say it gently. I said it with the kind of cold certainty that had been fermenting for 4 months. Not until the DNA test proves I'm the father. The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Marta gasped like someone had just yanked the air from her chest. My mother turned toward me slowly, her lips pressed into a line so tight it could have sliced marble. Ariel blinked at me, stunned, and then whispered in a voice that trembled with disbelief, "How dare you?" I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. Because 4 months ago, I found the email. It had been buried in her drafts, maybe forgotten, maybe kept as a trophy. I'd clicked it by accident while looking for an invoice. And there it was. "I'll always love you, but my husband must never know the baby isn't his." Sent to Jeremiah Lang, a name I hadn't recognized at first. A coworker, she later claimed. Nothing. I'd sat with that truth like it was a ticking bomb in my chest. I didn't confront her right away. I watched. I waited. I tracked the dates, the patterns, the secrecy disguised as busyness. I saw the way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I read the threads. I pieced it all together. And I waited for this day. The nurse excused herself quietly. The air in the room turned thick with tension and disbelief. Helen stepped forward, taking my arm with a firmness that spoke of years spent managing my stubbornness. She leaned in close, her voice sharp but quiet. "You're embarrassing the family," she hissed. I turned my head toward her, slowly. "No, Mom. I'm protecting it." Marta clutched Ariel like she was shielding her from a fire, but the fire was already here, burning through every illusion they constructed. Ariel's lips trembled, and tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She still didn't deny it, didn't explain. Maybe because she thought I never could have known. Maybe because part of her believed I'd sign anyway to keep up appearances. For the baby. For the name. But names mean something to me. Legacy means something. Truth, even when it guts you, means something. "You said you forgave me," Ariel whispered, and I realized she was drawing from some old conversation we never had. Some imagined grace I never gave. "You said you still wanted to raise the baby." I said, I corrected, that if the child is mine, I will be a father. But if she's not, I'm done. I said that. You remember that. Helen stepped away. Marta sputtered something incoherent, and the baby let out a small, helpless cry that twisted something deep in my chest. It wasn't her fault. She hadn't chosen this. But she wasn't mine, at least not yet, not until the truth said otherwise. And right now, I couldn't bring myself to lie just to preserve someone else's fantasy. I handed the clipboard back to the nurse without a mark on it. "No signature," I said flatly. Then I turned to leave. "You're walking away from your own child," Marta snapped behind me. I paused at the door, letting her words hang in the sterile air. "No," I said. "I'm walking toward the truth." And then I walked out of that hospital room. past the smiling nurses, past the congratulatory balloons and banners, past the congratulations from strangers who assumed I was just like every other proud father. But I wasn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I didn't look back. Marta's voice trembled with desperation as she fluttered around Ariel like a defensive shield, her hands shaking as she adjusted the baby's blanket for the third time. She kept glancing over at me like she was hoping I'd start laughing, admit it was all some cruel joke, some twisted emotional prank I'd pulled in poor taste. But I wasn't laughing. I hadn't laughed in months. Helen grabbed my arm as I made it halfway down the corridor. Her grip was firmer than expected for a woman her age. She yanked me to the side with the urgency of someone who still believed their maternal scolding carried weight. "You're embarrassing the family," she whisper-shouted, eyes wide and fierce. "Is that what you want? To shame us in front of everyone?" I stared at her, unimpressed. "Do you want to know what's actually shameful, Mom? Raising a child that isn't mine because my wife couldn't keep her legs closed." Her face twisted into a grimace at my words, but I didn't stop. "Do you want to know what's shameful? Lying to a man's face for 9 months while building a nursery in a house built on betrayal. That's shameful." Her lips parted to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded sheet of paper I had carried for weeks. The one I'd stared at on sleepless nights. The one I read so often I could recite it backward. I handed it to her. She took it like it might bite her. "I'm not speculating. I'm not being paranoid. Read it." She unfolded it, eyes scanning the screen-captured email. My chest ached as I watched her expression change. Confusion, realization, revulsion. She looked up at me like I'd just punched her in the gut. "I'll always love you, but my husband must never know the baby isn't his." I quoted aloud, my voice low and calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't throw anything. I just read it like it was scripture, because for me, it was gospel now. Proof of everything. The words that ended my marriage, my trust, and my willingness to play along with a lie that wasn't mine to carry. Helen didn't speak. She didn't need to. The color had drained from her face. She folded the email quietly and handed it back, hands trembling. Behind us, Marta emerged from the room like she was storming a courtroom. "She made a mistake," she said, voice trembling, as if rushing to rebuild a crumbling dam with her bare hands. Jeremiah meant nothing. It was confusing for her. She was stressed. "You two were going through a rough patch." "She was sleeping with another man," I interrupted, my voice like steel. "And she got pregnant. And she kept me in the dark because it was convenient." Marta's lips trembled, but she wasn't done. "Don't ruin this family," she whispered, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. "You two can work through this. The baby needs a father. You loved her once. I still love her," I said, cutting her off again. "And that's exactly why I can't pretend. Because pretending would kill whatever's left of me." They didn't understand it. To them, love was something that endured all, even lies. But for me, love wasn't a noose. It wasn't a tool of manipulation to shame me into silence. It wasn't meant to be weaponized. And still, they wanted me to pretend, to fold, to be the good man, the understanding man, the one who rises above. But I was done rising. I'd risen for years. Above the long nights alone, above the distance between us, above the way she started to hide her phone or come home a little too late. I rose above all of it for the sake of peace. But what had peace gotten me? A betrayal dressed in pink blankets and family smiles. I didn't owe anyone peace anymore. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice low and final. "Not until I know. And even then, we're done." I turned to Helen. "You can be embarrassed all you want, but I won't be humiliated in silence. Not for you. Not for anyone." Marta started crying softly, the kind of motherly sob designed to trigger guilt, designed to say, "Look what you've done. Look at the pain you've caused." But her daughter did that. Her daughter slept with another man and tried to pass the consequence off to me like I was some emotionally blind puppet. Ariel didn't come after me. She didn't say a word when I stepped out of the room. Maybe she knew I meant it this time. Or maybe she thought it was still reversible, that all it would take was a few convincing tears and her mother's pleading eyes. But this wasn't a fight. It was a funeral. I wasn't arguing with them. I was burying the man who used to believe in her. As I reached the elevator, I could still hear murmurs behind me. Low whispers. Damage control. Explanations they were trying to rehearse for the rest of the family. The pressure of legacy was in every syllable. But I didn't care. I had carried their expectations for years, holidays, traditions, business talks, The wind name like some hand-me-down suit that never quite fit. I'd had enough. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The ride down was silent, a soft hum filling the elevator like a lullaby for a life that just ended. I stepped into the hospital lobby, past flower arrangements and congratulatory signs. No one looked at me. No one knew I was walking out of something colossal. But I did. I walked straight through those doors. And I didn't look back. Not even once. The silence in the house was the loudest it had ever been. No crying baby, no Ariel humming off-key in the kitchen, no clinking of teacups or chatter from our mothers. Just me, standing in the entryway, staring at the suitcase I had packed with precision and without emotion. Her clothes, her books, her framed photos. Everything that belonged to her was now zipped up tight and ready to be delivered to the address on the divorce papers, Marta's house. I didn't let myself hesitate. I'd made the decision before I left the hospital, but now I was following through, laying down the line that would never be crossed again. Ariel never returned home after the hospital. She didn't call. She didn't text. I think even she knew she couldn't face me. Not with the truth out in the open and her performance so publicly shattered. The press of my finger against that elevator button in the maternity wing might as well have been a sledgehammer against everything we built. And maybe it was. Maybe that's exactly what it needed to be. I contacted Victor Kwan the same day. He was my lawyer, my former college roommate, and the one person I trusted not to let emotion cloud reason. I told him what happened. Laid out the timeline, the evidence, the refusal to sign the birth certificate, and the need to file immediately. Victor didn't ask questions. He didn't advise me to think it through or cool off. He just said, "Send me the files and I'll draft it tonight." By the next morning, Ariel had a knock on her mother's door and a man in a tailored gray suit delivering her a package of papers she had earned. The divorce had begun. Later that evening, Helen showed up at my place. She didn't knock like a guest. She used her key, the spare she'd had since the housewarming party 5 years ago. She let herself in like she owned the air between us. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a black coffee growing cold in my hands. She stood in the doorway, looking tired, but not fragile. My mother had never been fragile. Sharp, decisive, loyal to a fault, but not fragile. "You really did it," she said, no greeting, no hesitation. I did. Her eyes scanned the house like she expected to see Ariel hiding behind a corner or a suitcase still unpacked. But there was nothing. I'd cleaned, vacuumed, washed the sheets. The place already looked like she'd never lived here. And maybe she never really had, not in the way I thought she did. "You're being cruel," she said after a long silence. "You could have waited, talked it through, given her time." I stared at her. "No, Mom. Cruel is knowing that baby wasn't mine and letting me raise her like she was. Cruel is letting me fall in love with the idea of fatherhood while she whispered, 'I love you,' to someone else. Cruel is lying to your husband's face for almost a year and smiling while you do it." She flinched at my words. I didn't care. "She made a mistake," Helen offered, softening her voice like she could thread guilt through a needle. "No," I said, standing up. "A mistake is putting whites in with the colors. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. This, what she did, was a choice. Repeated, sustained, strategic. Don't reduce it to a mistake because it's easier to swallow." She moved closer to me. "She's hurting. You could have talked. She wasn't hurting when she was in Jeremiah's hotel room," I said sharply. "She wasn't hurting when she wrote that email." Helen's hand moved before I saw it coming. The slap wasn't hard enough to hurt, but the sound of it cracked across the kitchen like a whip. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I let the silence answer for me. She lowered her hand slowly, like realizing too late that the gesture had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "You don't mean it," she whispered. But I did. I meant every damn word. "I'm not raising another man's child, Mom. I'm not living a lie just because it looks better on paper or sounds nicer during Sunday dinner. If the child had been mine, I'd have stayed. I'd have fought. But she's not. And I'm done." I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just said it like it was the weather, unavoidable, natural, undeniable. Helen's eyes filled with tears. I hadn't seen her cry since Dad's funeral. And even then, she hadn't let herself sob. But now, watching her struggle between being my mother and being Marta's lifelong friend, I saw the tear escape. Just one. She wiped it away like it betrayed her strength. "You're really not going to forgive her?" She asked one last time. "No, not now. Not ever." And with that, she walked out. Quietly, slowly, like she was carrying something heavy. I watched her go, waited until the door clicked shut, and then I sat back down at the table. The coffee was cold. I didn't drink it. Instead, I pulled out a legal pad and started listing what needed to change: bank accounts, insurance policies, emergency contacts. Everything that still had her name attached to it. This wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I didn't hate her, but I no longer loved her. And I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. 2 weeks. 14 days of silence, emails ignored, phone calls unanswered, and doorbells left ringing. The waiting hadn't felt like waiting at all. It had felt like surviving. Like trying to breathe underwater while the world above moved on. The package had arrived that morning in a plain white envelope marked confidential. No drama. No fancy branding. Just a line that separated truth from assumption. Paternity report, Grayson Wynn. I didn't open it at home. Instead, I got in my car and drove to the address I hadn't stepped foot near since the day I walked out of that hospital. Marta's house. The same narrow driveway, the same overgrown hydrangeas flanking the porch, the same chipped welcome mat that had never quite lived up to its promise. I parked at the curb and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the tick of the cooling engine like it was counting down to something I couldn't stop. I rang the bell and waited. It didn't take long. Ariel opened the door. She looked different, softer somehow, but still armored in that kind of sadness people wear when they're hoping your memory has softened too. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, and her mouth parted like she'd practiced what she wanted to say, but all of it got stuck in her throat. "Grayson," she breathed. "You came." I didn't return the sentiment. I didn't step inside. I just said, "I didn't come for you." And then I held up the envelope. "I came to give this to your mother." Her face fell. Whatever hope she'd been holding on to slipped between her fingers like sand. She stepped aside without speaking. Marta was sitting on the living room couch, legs crossed, face carefully composed. She'd been waiting too, though her mask was better practiced. I walked in, handed her the envelope, and took 2 steps back. She hesitated before opening it, her hands working carefully, almost delicately, like she thought reverence might change the outcome. Helen was there too, in the corner, seated in an armchair she probably hadn't moved from in hours. Her eyes were already glassy before the paper was even unfolded. Marta read it out loud, maybe thinking that somehow, putting it into the air would lessen the blow. Probability of paternity, 0%. No one moved. No one said a word. The baby wasn't mine. The finality of it didn't bring the kind of relief I expected. It didn't crack through the tension like a gust of wind through stale air. It was a quiet confirmation of something I had already accepted long ago. But it mattered. It was real now. Irrefutable. Ariel dropped onto the arm of the sofa like someone had cut her strings. Helen pressed a tissue to her lips. I didn't offer comfort. I wasn't there for their grief. I was there for the truth. I looked at each of them in turn, my voice steady and calm. This child is not mine. Don't ever contact me again. And stop trying to rewrite history. It was the only sentence I had rehearsed over and over again in my mind for 14 days. And when I said it aloud, it didn't tremble. It didn't falter. Ariel's voice cracked. "Grayson, wait." But I was already turning. "I made one promise," I said, pausing near the door. "If the child was mine, I would have stayed. But she isn't. And I won't." Marta stood up then, bracing herself like she was about to fight for the scraps of dignity left on her living room rug. "You don't have to be cruel about it. She's your wife." "She was my wife," I corrected. "Now she's the mother of someone else's child." That silence returned. Heavy, unbreathing, more final than any courtroom. Helen rose slowly, her hand shaking slightly as she reached for her coat. She didn't look at me, just muttered, "Let him go. He's made his decision." But I wasn't done. Not quite. I turned back toward Ariel, just once. "Whatever story you tell her about me someday," I said, "make sure you start with the part where you lied." Her eyes filled with tears. "You think I haven't suffered?" I stared at her, stunned at the audacity. "You lied. You cheated. You carried his child and tried to hand her to me like a gift I'd be too emotional to question. And now that the curtain's down, you want sympathy?" "No." I walked out before she could say another word. The air outside hit my lungs like it was new. Cold, clean, detached. I got in my car and started the engine. The envelope, now empty, sat on the passenger seat like a closed chapter. And maybe it was. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the coast, where the sky met the water in that endless gray way it did when the weather had no opinion. I parked near a bluff, stepped out, and let the wind slap me clean. My feet found a trail I hadn't walked in years, something I used to do when I needed clarity. Before marriage, before betrayal, before fatherhood had dangled itself in front of me like a carrot tied to a string of lies. I stood there for a long time, watching the waves batter the rocks. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I didn't know Ariel forgiveness. I didn't know her family comfort. And I didn't know that child, whose face I'd only seen once. Any pieces of myself that were still intact. For years, that was how long it would be before I saw any of them again. For years before the next knock on the door. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the past was no longer mine to carry. And finally, for the first time in a long time, I felt weightless. Peace, when it finally came, didn't arrive with fanfare. It didn't knock loudly on my door or flood in like sunlight. It crept in slowly, like fog rolling off the hills at dawn, quiet, dense, and almost easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But I felt it. Every morning I woke up alone. Every evening I didn't have to answer to a lie in a silk robe. It was there, soft, subtle, unannounced. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, far enough from the gossip but close enough to my office downtown. No one questioned it. My coworkers were polite, the kind who knew better than to ask why you suddenly dropped 20 pounds or why your wedding ring had disappeared. They nodded in meetings, offered silent support in the form of fresh coffee and the occasional joke that didn't require much laughter in return. The building was quiet, mostly older tenants and young professionals who kept to themselves. My unit had high ceilings, bare walls, and a balcony that overlooked the street below where life continued at a pace that felt both too fast and too detached for my liking. But it was mine, every inch of it. And that ownership, over space, over my solitude, became sacred. I didn't date, didn't try to fill the void with half-hearted companionship or rebound affections. People told me I should. Well-meaning friends, colleagues, even Victor once suggested it over whiskey. You're still young, Gray. You've got time. Don't let her take that from you too. But it wasn't about time. It was about trust. Mine had been excavated down to its foundation. And until I could pour new concrete, I wasn't going to build anything on top of it. I poured myself into work. Software design was my quiet comfort, logic and structure, rules that didn't change behind your back. I spent hours writing code, testing prototypes, managing the new AI platform our team was building for diagnostic medical imaging. I was good at it. I always had been. But now I was relentless, driven by the kind of focus only a broken man could channel effectively. The app launched 6 months later. Investors came calling. Promotions followed. My name showed up in journals and on conference panels. I even got a plaque I didn't hang. I kept the recognition in a drawer. The only thing I hung on the wall was a photo of my father, taken on a camping trip when I was 10, him holding a burnt marshmallow on a stick, laughing like the world hadn't touched him yet. He'd passed years ago, but sometimes when the night grew too still, I'd stare at that photo and ask questions I never had the guts to ask when he was alive. Like how he knew Mom wouldn't leave, or what kept him believing in people when they failed him. Speaking of Mom, she called, now and then. Always polite, sometimes cautious. The way she spoke told me she was testing the waters, trying to see how deep my hurt still ran. How's work? She'd ask. Fine. You eating? Trying. Still at that apartment? Yup. She'd ask about women. I dodged the question. Then came the one I knew was hiding beneath all the others. Have you talked to Ariel? I'd go silent every time. Eventually, she stopped asking. She kept in touch with Marta. I didn't tell her not to. Childhood friends since they were 12, they'd survived broken homes, college dorms, marriages, and more funerals than they liked to admit. I understood. Loyalty has a gravity all its own. But I drew my line. I wouldn't step into that world again, even through a phone call. And Helen, bless her, respected that, even when I could hear the guilt in her voice. She tried a few times to mention the baby. I never let her finish. That door was closed. Permanently. Not because of the child. I knew she was blameless, but because everything that surrounded her felt like acid on my skin. I needed the wound to scab, to heal, to form a scar I could touch without flinching. And that required distance. Eventually, the calls became less frequent. Not out of malice, Just life. The rhythm of existence doesn't wait for anyone to catch their breath. And I didn't blame her. Not for her silence. Not for her friendship with Marta. We all had to survive in our own ways. Sometimes I wondered about Ariel. Where she went after the dust settled. Whether she stayed with Marta or moved on. Whether she tried to build a new life or kept searching for pieces of the one she shattered. But I never let those thoughts stay long. They didn't serve me. They had no purpose but to stir ghosts in a house I'd already burned down. I spent holidays alone at first. The first Christmas without her. I didn't decorate. Didn't play music. I watched a marathon of documentaries and ordered takeout. New Year's Eve was worse. Something about counting down into a future you didn't plan felt cruel. But by the second year, it got easier. By the third, I made a tradition out of disappearing into the mountains. Just me, a cabin, and the sound of snow brushing pine needles outside the window. There was a stillness in those years that I didn't expect. A kind of heavy peace that settled over everything. It didn't erase the past. It didn't pretend to, but it gave me permission not to carry it like luggage. I stopped replaying every conversation. Stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I had done everything right. That was the hardest truth to sit with. Because sometimes you do everything right and still get lied to. And that's not your fault. By the end of the fourth year, I'd learned how to breathe again without the phantom weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. I had routines. Morning runs, evening walks, journaling. I cooked my own meals, went to therapy once a month, and started learning guitar badly just because it made me laugh. I didn't become a saint. I still had moments. Some nights, the silence pressed too hard, and I poured whiskey into a glass with more desperation than celebration. But those moments didn't define me anymore. I had peace. Not the loud kind. Not the celebratory kind. But the kind that whispers, "You made it." And that was enough. For now. The phone rang just after 6 in the evening on a Tuesday, one of those gray, unremarkable days that moved more out of obligation than energy. I just returned from the office, coat still hanging off one shoulder, shoes wet from the drizzle outside. The apartment lights were dim, and the only sound was the soft simmer of dinner on the stove. It was quiet. Predictable. I liked it that way. Then my phone lit up, vibrating against the kitchen counter. The name that appeared on the screen stopped me in place. Mom. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than necessary, unsure why I hesitated. We spoke maybe once a month now. Small talk, updates, weather, health, and silence in between. But tonight, something about the timing, the hour, felt different. I picked it up. Hey. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Grayson. She paused after my name like she was trying to brace me. Can you meet me at Marta's house? My jaw tightened. My fingers curled slowly around the edge of the counter. Marta's. I repeated, as if I hadn't heard her right. You're calling me out of the blue to ask me to walk into that house. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The way she said it, it wasn't guilt-ridden or dramatic. Just still, measured. That scared me more than anything. I kept my voice even. Why? She took a breath. Just come, Grayson. Please. My first instinct was to say no. To hang up, pour myself a drink, and return to the quiet simplicity of my life. But I'd known my mother long enough to recognize when she was masking urgency with calm. Something was wrong. I could hear it under her words, in the tiny catch at the end of her sentence. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. The drive to Marta's was familiar, even after all these years. The streets hadn't changed. Same potholes, same half-dead oaks lining the curbs, same fading corner store on Whitmore Avenue. But something in me had. I wasn't the man who once sat at that dinner table trying to impress a family that would never really see me. I wasn't the man who watched his wife cradle a child that didn't belong to him. I was different now. Steeled. Detached. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as I remembered. Stubbornly pristine, with its rose bushes trimmed too perfectly, as if trying to convince the world that what happened inside couldn't possibly be ugly. I rang the bell once. The door opened a moment later. A boy stood there, no older than 4 or 5, dressed in navy pajamas with small yellow stars on them. His eyes were bright, curious, but not scared. "Are you Grandma Helen's son?" he asked, blinking up at me. The words hit like a wave against a seawall. Not because of the question, but because of the innocence in it. The way he said it like he'd been told to expect me. Like my presence was somehow meant to be a good thing. I blinked. "Yeah, I am." He smiled. "Okay," he said, and without another word, turned turned and darted back inside. I stood frozen at the threshold, stunned by how easily that little boy had walked past every guard I'd spent 4 years building. Inside, Helen was on the couch. Marta was beside her. Between them, a photo album lay open, pages fluttering under the breeze from the ceiling fan. I stepped in, shutting the door behind me. No one said anything right away. Helen looked up first. "Sit," she said gently. I didn't. I stayed standing. "What's going on?" Marta was the one who answered. Her voice was lower than I remembered. Age had worn it down, frayed the ends. "There's something you need to know," she said. I crossed my arms. "I'm not here for confessions or rewritten history. Say what you have to say." Helen took over. "Ariel's gone." The world went still. Gone. I didn't respond right away. My brain wrapped itself around the word like it was a foreign language. Gone. Not gone to the store. Not gone on a trip. Gone. "What do you mean, gone?" I finally asked. Helen's voice was barely a whisper now. "She died 2 months ago. Car accident. Instant. No breath left my lungs. It just sat there, tight, like I was waiting for more detail, for clarification, for anything that would stop the freefall. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I didn't feel vindicated or vengeful. I just existed in that moment. Still, stiff, hollow. Then, from the hallway, came a soft laugh. A child's laugh. Light and fleeting. I looked toward the sound. The boy. Marta's voice drew me back. He's her son. The room tilted slightly. My knees locked to keep from sitting. "Jeremiah vanished years ago," she added. "No one's seen him. No contact. No support. Nothing." I let the silence answer for me. Then Helen looked at me, eyes tired but clear. "We want you to raise him." It was so absurd that I laughed. Just once. A single, bitter exhale that escaped before I could swallow it. "You want me to what?" I said. Marta leaned forward. "He's all that's left, Grayson. He's a good boy. Sweet. Smart. But he has no one." I looked between them. At the photo album on the couch. At the careful setup. This had been rehearsed. "No," I said firmly. Helen didn't flinch. "You're his only chance at stability. He's not my responsibility." "You loved her once," she said softly. "She left letters. She asked that if anything ever happened." "No," I said again, backing away. "We're both dying," Helen said. That made me stop cold. She met my eyes. "Stage 4. Both of us. Me and Marta." I swallowed. "You're lying." "Would we lie about this?" Marta whispered. I looked at her, and for the first time, saw something real, fragility. Not the performative kind, the real kind. Skin paper thin, eyes dull. Her hand trembled as she lifted a manila folder and placed it on the table. Custody papers, letters, photos, legal files. My heart beat against my ribs, confused, angry, afraid. "I didn't come here to be manipulated," I said. "You came because you still care," Helen replied, standing slowly. "And because you're the only one who can give that boy a life that means something." I didn't answer. I just left. But I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt. Not even because of Ariel. But because of the boy's smile. The one thing in that house that hadn't asked me for anything. And still managed to haunt me. Marta's house hadn't changed. Not the chipped white paint framing the windows. Not the gnome in the front garden with the missing ear. Not the sag in the porch swing I'd once sat in when I still believed this family could be my own. I hadn't been here in years. Not since the envelope. Not since I handed over truth and walked out into the silence that followed. But that silence had ended now. I parked by the curb again, same spot. Same view of the brick path leading to the door. I didn't know what I was expecting when I walked up the steps. More guilt, maybe. More pleading. More of Helen's hollow eyes asking me to patch over mistakes that weren't mine to begin with. I didn't expect a child. The knock had barely echoed before the door swung open. And there he was. A boy. Maybe 5, maybe 6. Hair sticking up in all directions like he'd just woken from a nap. His pajamas were too short at the ankles and covered in cartoon rockets. In one hand, he clutched a small plastic dinosaur. In the other, a cookie with a bite missing. But it was his eyes that caught me. Wide, alert, and somehow already full of a kind of stillness that didn't belong in a child so young. "Are you Grandma Helen's son?" he asked. I blinked. "Yeah, I am." He nodded like that made perfect sense, then turned around and scampered off down the hallway, disappearing around the corner without another word. I stood there, stunned. That's the moment that cracked me. Not the staged appeal, Not the diagnoses, not the paperwork, but the innocent certainty in that boy's face. He looked at me like he'd been told I was someone worth meeting, someone who belonged. I stepped into the house slowly, half expecting to see Ariel emerge from the kitchen, laughing and tossing some clever remark over her shoulder. But of course, she didn't. She never would again. Helen sat on the couch, shoulders hunched, hands folded like she was praying but had long since stopped believing it would matter. Beside her, Marta looked older than I remembered. Grief, illness, and time had carved lines into her face that makeup couldn't hide. The photo album lay open on the coffee table, page after page of the boy's life. Birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, first days of school. Ariel's face appeared often, smiling, alive, beautiful in a way that almost made me forget everything she had done. Almost. Helen stood as I entered. "Thank you for coming." I didn't reply. Marta gestured toward the chair across from them. "Please sit." I remained standing. "His name's Tobias," Marta said. She named him after Ariel's grandfather. I nodded. I didn't ask why they were telling me this. I already knew. "He doesn't know everything," Helen added. "Just that his mother passed, that she loved him very much, and that we've been raising him together." "He asked about his father?" I asked, voice low. "He used to," Marta said, "but he stopped. Jeremiah, he vanished. Grayson. The man disappeared off the grid years ago. Last thing we heard, he sold his place and moved out of state. Left no forwarding address." I let that sink in. It made sense. The kind of man who'd father a child and then ghost the responsibility was the same kind who wouldn't show up when his son needed him most. I hated him. I hated him more than I hated Ariel. At least she had stayed. Helen reached for the manila folder again. "Everything's here. Custody papers. A letter from Ariel. Her will. Financial transfers. She left everything to him, but she wanted you to raise him." I snapped, cutting her off. "Why me?" "Because she knew you were the only man who wouldn't use him to punish her." I stared at her, stunned. "She knew what she did," Helen continued, "and she didn't expect forgiveness. But she also knew you. You never hurt people just because they hurt you. That's not who you are." I turned my gaze to the hallway where Tobias had disappeared. His laugh echoed faintly from what I assumed was his room. He didn't know who I was, what I had been to his mother, what I had chosen to leave behind. She expected me to raise the son she made while she was cheating on me? I said, the bitterness spilling out. "No," Helen said. "She hoped you would. There's a difference." Marta pushed a letter across the table. It was handwritten, cream-colored stationery. The same pen Ariel had always used to leave notes on the fridge. I didn't open it. "Not yet. I need time," I said finally. "Of course," Helen replied, her voice cracking. I turned toward the door, but then I heard the footsteps. Small, bare, fast. Tobias appeared in the hallway again, this time holding a book. "Do you like dinosaurs?" he asked. I turned, caught off guard. "Yeah, I guess I do." He beamed. "This one's my favorite," he said, holding up a tattered copy of Danny and the Dinosaur. "He helps people, even though he's different." The simplicity of that hit something deep. "Cool book," I said. He smiled, then darted back down the hallway. I walked out without saying goodbye. But that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter in my lap. I read it, every word. Ariel had written it weeks before the crash. She didn't beg. She didn't grovel. She wrote like a woman who knew time was running out. She wrote about regret, about hope, about Tobias. "He's not your son by blood," she'd written, "but I believe. Deep down, you were always meant to be his father." I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, her words looping in my mind. I hadn't come looking for family, but family, somehow, had found me anyway. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after. I stayed away, let the phone ring when Helen tried again. Let the letters sit on the counter. Let silence build like armor. I wasn't ready. Not to decide, not to commit, and certainly not to walk willingly into a life that had once betrayed me with a pink blanket and a fake smile. But the boy's voice, his innocent question, that moment of unfiltered curiosity, followed me. He was everywhere now, in the empty space beside my couch, in the extra plate I automatically set on the kitchen counter out of habit, in the toys I saw in shop windows I used to walk past without noticing. The world hadn't changed, but something inside me had cracked, and I couldn't tape it up the way I used to. Helen showed up 3 days later. No call, no warning. Just the sound of soft knocking on my apartment door while I was cooking eggs I had no appetite for. I didn't open it right away. I watched her through the peephole. She looked older. Not sick exactly, but slower. Like her body had finally started showing the miles her soul had walked. I opened the door. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped past me, carrying a paper bag that smelled of lemon tea and disappointment. "Thought you might want company," she said, placing it on the counter like she'd been here 1,000 times before. I didn't answer. She poured tea for herself and sat down at my dining table like this was just another visit. I let her sit in silence while I leaned against the counter, arms folded, waiting for the speech. It didn't take long. "We both have stage 4 cancer," she said, without preamble. I stared at her. "What?" She didn't repeat it. She just took a sip of tea, as if she'd told me we were out of sugar instead of dropping a bomb. "Marta and I, diagnosed last winter. Hers is ovarian. Mine's pancreatic. We're doing what we can, but we both know how this ends." I sat down slowly. "And you're telling me this because?" "Because you're the only one left," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "Grayson, we're not going to be around much longer. And that little boy, he's going to lose everyone." I swallowed. My throat felt dry. "You expect me to take on the child of the man who destroyed my marriage?" "No," she said gently. "We're asking you to save a child who had nothing to do with any of that." Her words hung in the air like fog. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind her of what Ariel had done, of the years I'd lost, of the therapy sessions, the isolation, the anger I'd buried just to keep functioning. But I couldn't shake the image of Tobias standing in that hallway with a book in his hand and hope in his eyes. Helen reached into her purse and slid another folder across the table. "We've started the custody process. The transfer is clean. Ariel left everything in writing. Power of attorney, her will, letters." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents. Neat. Prepared. Like a plan laid years in advance. "She really believed I'd come back," I muttered, more to myself than to Helen. "She believed you were the only person who could raise him with integrity," Helen said. "She knew what she'd lost, and she wanted him to have something better than secrets and shame. I'm not his father." "No, you're not. But you're the only one who's shown up." Her voice cracked then, just slightly. I looked down at the papers. There was a letter from Ariel again. Shorter. A line that stayed with me. "If you say no, I'll understand. But if you say yes, you'll be giving him a life filled with everything you once wanted to give us. A real home. A real chance." I closed the folder and stood. "I need time." Helen nodded. She didn't push. She just stood, took the empty teacup, and washed it in my sink like a ritual she needed to complete. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You may think this is about morality, about right and wrong, but it's not. It's about choosing not to let someone else's betrayal become a child's punishment." And then she was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the folder still on my table. I opened it, not for the papers, but for the photo tucked between the last 2 pages. Tobias at a park, arms wide, mouth open in a laugh. There was nothing staged about it. No forced smiles. Just pure joy. I stared at it for what felt like hours. The boy was innocent. He hadn't asked to be born into this mess. He hadn't asked for his mother to crash her car, for his father to disappear, for his grandmothers to fade under the weight of disease. He hadn't asked for me, either. But he was asking now, in the way children do without words. Just presence. He had no idea who I was. But he'd asked me if I liked dinosaurs. The smallest olive branch in the world. And it broke me. By morning, the decision was made. I called Victor and told him to begin the formal process. I told him I didn't care how quiet or public it had to be. I wanted it done right. Clean. Legal. Final. But even then, I hadn't said yes aloud. Not yet. Because sometimes saying something makes it real. And I wasn't ready for that wait just yet. But I was close. So damn close. A week later, I stood on that familiar porch again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I knocked once, firmly, and waited. I already knew the door would open quickly. Marta had probably been watching from the window like before, anticipating the shape of my silhouette. But I didn't come for her or Helen. I came for him. The door creaked open, and there he was, Tobias. He blinked up at me, still in those same navy pajamas with stars on them, but this time with socks that didn't match, one orange, one gray. His hair was wild again, and a smudge of chocolate sat on the edge of his mouth like evidence of a snack too close to dinner. His face lit up the moment he recognized me. "You came back," he said, as if that was the most natural outcome in the world. I smiled small, cautious. But it was real. "Yeah," I said. "I came back." He looked over his shoulder, then back at me, whispering like he was letting me in on a secret. "Grandma said you might not." I knelt at his level. "Well," I said, looking him in the eyes. I thought about it for a long time, but I decided something. "What? You're coming with me?" His eyes widened. "For real?" I nodded. "For real." Tobias launched himself at me with the kind of trust only children possess, the kind that shatters whatever distance still exists between decision and heart. I caught him, surprised at how small he still felt in my arms. His arms wrapped around my neck, and his dinosaur book slipped from his hand to the floor. He whispered, "Okay, Daddy." And just like that, he called me that. I didn't correct him, didn't pause, didn't explain that biology said otherwise. Because in that moment, it didn't matter. His arms were around me. His trust was offered without condition. And for the first time in years, I felt like something in the world had clicked into place. Marta appeared in the doorway behind him. She didn't speak, just stepped aside, eyes glossy with something unspoken. I carried Tobias inside, set him down gently, and took the envelope Helen held out. "All the documents," she said, her voice hoarse. "Everything you need. He's yours to raise now." I glanced at her. "How much time do you have?" She gave a tired smile. "Enough to see you both start." That night, I packed Tobias's things myself. A few clothes, his toothbrush, the dinosaur book, a photo of Ariel. One I found tucked into a handmade frame he'd painted with her help. I asked him if he wanted it, and he nodded solemnly, like he knew it was a goodbye more permanent than most. The apartment felt different with him in it. Brighter, louder, messier, but alive. He didn't ask many questions that first night. I made him mac and cheese. We watched cartoons. I let him fall asleep on the couch beside me, his head resting on my arm. And when I carried him to the second bedroom, once my office, now hastily transformed into his room, I stood in the doorway a long time after he'd fallen asleep. He slept the way only children do, unaware of the past, unburdened by doubt. The adoption process was quiet. Victor made sure of that. No press. No dramatic court hearing. Just paperwork, fingerprints, a background check, and a courtroom with beige walls and a tired judge who smiled at us when she read the final order aloud. "Congratulations, Mr. Wynn. He's yours now." I shook her hand. Tobias held mine the entire time. Afterward, we went out for pancakes. He ordered chocolate chip with whipped cream. I let him. He smeared syrup across his cheek, laughing so hard I thought he might fall out of the booth. And for the first time in years, I laughed too. A full laugh. From the gut. Not polite. Not for show. Just real. 3 months later, my mother died. She went quietly. At home. Marta called to say the hospice nurse had stepped out of the room for 10 minutes. And when she returned, Helen was gone. No struggle. No pain. Just a whisper of breath that never returned. I took Tobias to the funeral. He held my hand and asked questions softly during the service. He wanted to know if Grandma Helen was in the clouds. I told him maybe. Or maybe in the wind. Or in the warmth of a cup of tea. He liked that answer best. Marta passed a few weeks after. By then, she'd lost most of her speech. Cancer had stolen her sharp tongue, her strength, and the spark behind her eyes. But when I visited, she would still smile when Tobias walked into the room. One of the last coherent things she said was, "He's safe now." I held her hand until the machines went quiet. After the funeral, Tobias and I went to the beach. He liked the sound of the waves. Said it reminded him of the stories Ariel used to read to him. I didn't ask for details. I just sat with him, watching as he buried his toes in the sand and built lopsided castles only to knock them down. He never asked about Jeremiah, and I never offered information. There were some stories not worth revisiting, some ghosts that didn't deserve names. We settled into a rhythm. School in the morning, cartoons in the evening, Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime dinosaur facts. He loved space too, especially black holes and Saturn's rings. I bought him a telescope for his birthday. He used it for 2 hours straight and then fell asleep on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around him. I found him there around midnight, curled up like a question mark, and carried him back to bed. Some nights, I caught myself staring at him while he slept, wondering how a boy born of chaos could bring such steady peace into my life. It didn't make sense. But maybe that was the point. Not everything had to. I told no one. No Instagram posts. No Facebook updates. I didn't share our journey. I didn't tell the world about the boy who called me dad, even though I never asked him to. Our life didn't need a stage. It needed stability, privacy, a sense of belonging untouched by gossip or speculation. He was mine now, and I was his. The court said so. The papers said so. But most importantly, his voice said so. Every night. "Good night, Dad," he'd whisper. And I'd whisper back, "Good night, Toby." We didn't talk about Ariel often. But sometimes, I'd see her in the way he smiled crookedly when he lied about brushing his teeth, or the way he hummed to himself while reading. And I'd let those pieces stay. I didn't hate her anymore. Not really. She'd given me pain, yes. But through her mistakes, through the wreckage, she'd also given me Tobias. And for that, I could finally say, I was grateful. Life didn't change in one sweeping moment after the adoption. There wasn't some dramatic swell of music or sudden shift in atmosphere. Instead, it was in the smallest things. The way the hallway light now stayed on a little longer at night because Tobias liked to fall asleep with a soft glow. The way the refrigerator slowly filled with juice boxes and string cheese. The way a single toothbrush beside mine on the sink could turn an empty apartment into a home. I found myself relearning everything. Parenthood didn't come naturally to me, not at first. I overcooked chicken nuggets. I folded his clothes wrong. I forgot that kids need shoes with Velcro, not laces, if you don't want to be 10 minutes late every morning. But Tobias didn't mind. He never made me feel like I was failing. He watched my every move with that unfiltered admiration children reserve for people who don't lie to them. And I didn't lie to him. I never claimed to be perfect. I never tried to be Ariel or Jeremiah. I just showed up every day. I helped him with homework, bandaged his scraped knees, taught him how to throw a baseball in the park on Sundays. And somehow, in the rhythm of our quiet days, I became something I hadn't felt in years. Whole. We made traditions. Taco Tuesdays, even though neither of us really liked tacos. Saturday morning cartoons and laundry folding. Friday night pizza with extra olives, his favorite, not mine. Every now and then, we'd visit the bookstore downtown where I let him pick one new story to take home. He always went straight to the dinosaur section, though by now we had them all. I never said no to books. They were the bridges between our past and our future. The spaces where his imagination bloomed and mine found peace. Then, one night, months after the court finalized everything, I found an envelope. It was tucked into the bottom of Helen's old cedar chest, which now lived at the foot of my bed. I hadn't opened it since she passed, but Tobias had been digging through drawers for a missing sock, and when he yanked the chest open out of curiosity, the envelope spilled out with a soft thud. "Is this from Grandma Helen?" he asked, holding it up. I recognized her handwriting instantly. I took it from him gently. "Yeah, it is." He watched me with wide eyes. "You gonna open it?" "Maybe later, kiddo," I said. He accepted that, already distracted by the sock he'd finally found and the Lego spaceship he was determined to finish before bedtime. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The apartment was dark except for the warm pool of light from the pendant above me. I ran my finger along the edge of the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single photograph. Helen, Marta, both smiling, younger, thinner, healthier. Standing in front of an old army base entrance with bold lettering overhead. Fort Langley, 1988. They looked happy. Sunlight framed them like a halo. But it wasn't the picture itself that pulled at me, it was the note written on the back. Fort Langley, 1988. We've always handled things ourselves. That was it. No explanation. No date beyond the year. No names. Just a cryptic statement that felt more like a confession than a caption. I stared at it for a long time. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't know what handled things meant. I didn't know why they'd been at a military base, or what that had to do with Ariel, or Jeremiah, or me. But it raised questions I didn't want answers to. Not anymore. I had lived long enough with truths that had gutted me. If there were more shadows hiding in that past, I didn't want to drag them into the light, not at the expense of the peace Tobias and I had fought so hard to build. Some truths belong in the dark. I burned the photo in the sink, watched the corners curl, blacken, and disappear into ash and smoke. Whatever they handled, it was buried now, with them, and I didn't need to unearth it. What mattered was across the apartment, sound asleep, hugging his dinosaur plush like it was the most valuable thing on earth. The next morning, Tobias came into the kitchen wearing a crooked tie and a proud grin. "Picture day," he said. "Right," I replied, crouching to fix the knot. "You excited?" "Yep. Miss Carroll said we get extra recess if everyone dresses nice." I chuckled. "Bribery works at every age, huh?" He laughed too, then looked up at me with something softer in his eyes. "Do you think Mom would like my tie?" I paused, then nodded slowly. "I think she'd love it." That was all he needed. He grabbed his backpack, darted toward the door, then stopped short. Turned back. "Hey, Dad." "Yeah." He held out a piece of paper. "Can you sign this? For school?" I reached for it without thinking, then froze. It wasn't just a permission slip. It was the adoption certificate. The final copy. Somehow, it had been returned to me in a school folder without ceremony or notice. Clean. Official. My name at the bottom. His too. All the necessary stamps and signatures in place. Except one. Mine. I hadn't signed the final form. I looked at Tobias, standing there with his hopeful eyes and lopsided socks, still chewing on the edge of his sleeve like he always did when he was nervous. He didn't know what the paper meant. Not really. To him, I'd been Dad since the day I came back. But I knew what it meant. It meant closing the door. It meant sealing a chapter one hadn't fully dared to believe I deserved. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed it with my full name. Not out of obligation. Not out of guilt. But because I meant it. Because I had become the thing I once thought betrayal had stolen from me. A father. Tobias grinned and stuffed the form into his folder like it was nothing. "Thanks, Dad." He ran off, leaving a trail of cereal crumbs behind him. I watched him go, my chest full in a way I'd never quite known. It wasn't the birth certificate I'd refused to sign all those years ago. It was something better, stronger, truer. A declaration. Not of blood, but of choice. Of love. And this time, I signed it with peace.